Orange County Civil Rights History. These images, in the minds of many people, epitomize what Orange County once was: the Orange Empire, the Magic Kingdom, the enticing coastal communities. But this is far from a complete picture. We hope that this presentation helps create a context to better understand some of the challenges, issues, and hard fought victories that Orange County has experienced and continues to face. This presentation is an abridged history and, for the most part, organized chronologically. The events in the civil rights history of Orange County presentation do depict injustices, difficult events, and instances of violence. Viewer discretion is advised. The current demographics of Orange County include those that identify as white, about 39%, Latinx, about 35%, Asian, about 21%, mixed multiple race, about 3%, less than 2% identify as Black or African American, 0.3% Pacific Islander Hawaiian, 0.2% Native American Indigenous, and 0.2% other. 31% of Orange County's population is foreign born. Approximately 51% of those foreign born are U.S. citizens. 46% of the county's residents speak a language other than English at home. There are over 80 faiths practiced in Orange County. As you listen to this presentation, we encourage you to reflect on the link between our history and the current demographics of our county. Orange County grew fairly slowly in its first 50 years, and it remained a relatively rural area. But the Second World War changed all that. Note the huge increase between 1950 and 1960 when the population tripled. Since then, there has been a steady and rapid growth in population. We'll look more at that later, but first let's look at some of the little-known aspects of our county's history.
We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land we live, work, and play on is within the traditional territories of the Tongva and Hachiman people who first settled this land about 8,000 years ago. Anthropologists conclude these communities enjoyed a relatively comfortable lifestyle due to the plentiful natural resources and the hospitable climate. The first Europeans to set foot here were members of a Spanish expedition led by Captain Gaspar de Portola that passed through in 1769. Portola was responsible for a number of the county place names that still exist, including Santa Ana, San Clemente, and Trabuco Hills. Beginning in the late 1700s, the Spanish built a network of missions throughout Baja and California. The Spanish flag was replaced by the Mexican flag in 1822. In the 1830s, the Mexican government took control of the missions built by Spain, and Mexican ranchers seized the lands that the Spanish had promised to give to the indigenous peoples of the area. The land that was to become Orange County was divided into large cattle ranches and sold to people with names such as Pio Pico, Santiago, and Yorba. In 1846, after years of border disputes, the USA and Mexico went to war. By 1848, the United States had prevailed, and with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, California became part of the Union. It's interesting to note that this treaty guaranteed all Mexican citizens living on the land ceded to the U.S. the right of U.S. citizenship. The U.S. government seized much of the California land formerly owned by Mexican ranchers and sold it to American citizens. One of the purchasers was James Irvine, who bought 120,000 acres at a cost of 25 cents per acre. In the mid to late 1800s, many of the towns we're familiar with were established. In the 1850s, German immigrants purchased 1,200 acres and settled the Anaheim colony. Santa Ana was founded by William Spurgeon as a stagecoach stop, and oil was discovered in Brea Canyon, which drew considerable interest to the area. Southern Pacific and Santa Fe Railways engaged in a price war. Thousands of people chose to come here to seek their fortune. In 1889, the County of Orange was created. Formerly, the area had been governed by Los Angeles, and the county's first jail and high school were built in Santa Ana. In 1893, the Southern California Fruit Exchange, later renamed Sunkist, was formed in Fullerton. At the formation of Orange County, there were only 3 incorporated cities: Anaheim in 1878, Santa Ana in 1886, and Orange in 1888. The total population of the new county was 13,000.
On August 20th of 1892, Francisco Torres was in the county jail, awaiting trial for the murder of a popular white Orange County resident. 35 white men broke him out of jail and lynched him. This is the only known lynching in Orange County. There were between 50 and 70 lynchings in the state of California between 1875 and 1947. The majority were in rural counties such as Kern, Modoc, and Sonoma. At the turn of the century, the region near present-day 3rd and Main Streets in Santa Ana was inhabited by people of Chinese ancestry living in a maze of small wooden buildings. Santa Ana's densely populated Chinatown had no running water or proper sanitation. In May of 1906, a person living in Chinatown was discovered to have leprosy. The Santa Ana Board of Trustees voted to burn the buildings to halt the spread of the disease throughout the remainder of the city. On May 28th of 1906, the Santa Ana Fire Department set the area on fire. A crowd of several hundred people gathered to watch. The firefighters used their hoses to prevent the fire from spreading to other areas of Santa Ana. Chinatown was never rebuilt, and its citizens dispersed throughout the vicinity, including into the city of Anaheim.
By 1920, the residents of Anaheim's Chinatown were run out by the KKK. According to Anaheim PD, the KKK patrolled city streets in their robes. They harassed immigrants, organized parades and demonstrations. Per the Historical Society of Southern California, quote, Anaheim was chosen as the site for one of the largest Klan gatherings ever held in California. On the night of July 29, 1924, up to 20,000 people from as far away as Bakersfield, San Bernardino, and San Diego gathered in Anaheim City Park to witness the initiation of over 1,000 new Klansmen. The ceremonies began with a parade from the nearby Santa Fe station. Led by the 75-piece Los Angeles Klan marching band, a long line of robed Klansmen walking down the main street and through the business section to the tune of Onward Christian Soldiers. On the ground, a huge cross, nearly 30 feet high, and several other smaller crosses were ignited and left to burn throughout the evening. The Klan in Orange County was led by Reverend Leon Myers, pastor of the First Christian Church in Anaheim, who was the Cyclops for the Ku Klux Klan in Orange County. Targeting Roman Catholics, Jews, Black people, immigrants, and others with hate and conspiracy rhetoric, the Klan achieved real social and political power in Orange County in the 1920s. In 1922, when the Sisters of St. Joseph arrived in Orange County, they experienced anti-Catholic sentiment and became targets of the Ku Klux Klan. Despite this initial intolerance, the first St. Joseph Hospital was opened in Orange in 1929. During this time, KKK crosses were burned in Anaheim, Fullerton, and Yorba Linda to alert the general populace to the Klan's existence in Orange County. In 1924, 4 Klansmen were elected into the Anaheim City Council. Many city residents were not aware the councilmen they had elected were members of the Klan. An anti-KKK group dubbed the USA Club aimed to rid the area of Klan influence and submitted a petition to recall the Klan councilmen in Anaheim. The 1925 recall election required extra armed guards to protect polling booths, but proved to be a decisive victory for the anti-Klan community. All the Klan councilmen and the mayor were recalled by large margins. Recalled Mayor Metcalf blamed the result on, quote, ineligible Mexican voters.
According to the LA Times, by the 1920s, Black homebuyers were able to buy spacious, wooded lots in the southwest section of Santa Ana because white landowners were willing to sell properties to Black people in areas where neighbors did not live close by. The community grew along Bristol Street between 2nd and 4th Streets, now Santa Ana Boulevard, and spread north and west. During the 1960s and into 1970s, Bristol Street was a solid, invisible border that hemmed Orange County's Black population into a Santa Ana neighborhood of pastel bungalows and cottages variously nicknamed Little Texas or The Rock. The color line was guarded by the gatekeepers of real estate agents and police officers who held the border against Black residents. By necessity, the segregated Santa Ana neighborhood became the cultural hub for Black Orange County residents, bound together by churches, clubs, barbershops, beauty salons, and restaurants. With the introduction of discriminatory state and federal housing laws and pressure by local communities, Santa Ana's historic Black settlement dwindled. In 1970, 2 of every 3 Black residents in Orange County lived in Santa Ana. 20 years later, 1 in 5. Today, Black residents make up less than 2% of Orange County's entire population. Slated to be built on the shores of Huntington Beach between 1925 and 1926, the Pacific Beach Club was designed for LA's growing Black middle class. The proprietors secured 7 acres and commenced building a bathhouse for 1,500 people, a ballroom and pavilion and clubhouse for 2,000, a restaurant, grocery store, drugstore, and a 200-unit tent city equipped with water, electricity, and gas. Contractors frequently abandoned the project while white business interests, the Chamber of Commerce, and the KKK in Huntington Beach obstructed efforts of the club's proprietors to obtain permits, water, and electricity. Finally, 2 weeks before the Pacific Beach Club's grand opening, two arsonists, suspected to be KKK members, burned it to the ground. No arrests were ever made.
In 1900, there were 70 acres of citrus orchards in Orange County. By 1940, there were 75,000 acres. In the 1920s, the border was virtually open between the U.S. and Mexico, and workers were encouraged to come here with the promise of good-paying jobs. According to the University of Texas, over 500,000 Mexicans were deported back to Mexico during the Great Depression in the 1930s. In 1940, citrus crops were one of the largest sources of income for the county. The vast majority of people who worked in the orange groves were Mexican migrant workers. In the 1930s, citrus workers typically earned 25 cents per hour, and frequently half their earnings were held back by the company to pay for their primitive campsites. According to Oakland Museum, the campsites the migrant workers were provided with often had no toilet facilities, laborers were forced to dig holes in the ground, no running water, water was obtained from polluted creeks in the area, and no electricity. In addition, the workers often had no choice but to purchase their provisions from company stores at highly inflated prices. In June of 1936, thousands of orange citrus workers went on strike.
Citrus growers, police, newspapers, and politicians joined together to oppose the strike. The Santa Ana Register lobbied hard against the strike, printing reports that said the strikers were, quote, communist agitators wanting to launch a reign of terror against the county. According to a Santa Ana Register headline from July 7th of 1936, sheriffs and newly deputized citizens arrested and jailed 115 picketers. Hooded vigilantes broke up union meetings with axe handles and tear gas bombs. Hundreds of workers were herded into fence camps that had been built in Santa Ana. The strikers were marched into court and found guilty by judges and juries who had been bought by the growers. The strikers were jailed, husbands were separated from their wives, and children torn from the arms of their mothers and fathers placed in receiving homes, where many of them were later, quote, adopted out. Many of the workers were even deported to Mexico. By July, the growers had won, and the morale of the strikers was so low that they agreed to return to the groves with only a slight wage increase.
Between 1942 and 1964, a guest worker program was established. Over 2 million people participated in the program. Many worked in the Orange County citrus orchards. The cheap labor of the braceros, as they were called, was used to keep the other farm workers from organizing into labor unions. They were threatened with being replaced by a bracero. 10% of the braceros' wages were withheld. These funds were supposed to be sent back to Mexico. The workers never received the withheld money, estimated to be up to $1 billion. Former workers launched lawsuits to reclaim these funds. In October 2005, nearly 40 years later, it was announced that former braceros would receive a one-time payment of $3,500, about one-third of what the workers say they're owed. Even today, conditions for farm workers are very bad. According to the United Farm Workers, the UFW, several California farm workers have died of heat-related causes, a result of working 10-hour days in temperatures of over 100 degrees.
Citizens and political leaders from Washington, Oregon, and California demanded that residents of Japanese ancestry be removed from their homes on the coast and relocated in isolated inland areas, such as Camp Manzanar in Owens Valley, California. 120,000 Japanese Americans, 75% of whom were U.S. citizens and the majority children under the age of 18, were held in detention centers and concentration camps as a result of President Roosevelt's 1942 executive order. The majority of these U.S. citizens removed from Orange County were incarcerated at the Colorado River Relocation Center near Parker, Arizona. Many of those classified as enemy alien, meaning non-citizen, were sent to DOJ or military prison camps. Anxiety following the attack at Pearl Harbor prompted the U.S. military to set up a system of observation towers, artillery positions, and lookout points across coastal communities. According to the LA Times, 3 of these locations were set up in Orange County. The Bolsa Chica Bluff Top, Huntington Beach Pier, and Newport Beach Hill above 53rd Street were equipped with heavy artillery and served as lookouts for Japanese submarines. Many Japanese Americans lost their homes and businesses as a result of this forced removal. The detention was challenged as being unconstitutional and ended in 1944. Yet hostility against Japanese Americans remained high into the post-war years, and many towns displayed signs demanding that those forcibly removed never returned. It wasn't until 1989 that the U.S. government formally apologized for the imprisonment of countless Japanese Americans during World War II.
In the 1940s, a sign similar to the one shown here was posted on the bridge leading to Balboa Island. Several cities throughout Orange County have been long suspected of being sundown towns during this era. Oral histories cite over 15 cities in Orange County. According to blackpast.org, sundown towns were all white communities, neighborhoods, or counties that excluded black people and other marginalized communities through the use of discriminatory laws, harassment, and threats or use of violence. The name derives from the posted and verbal warnings issued to black people that although they might be allowed to work or travel in a community during the daytime, they must leave by sundown or face harassment and possibly death. Although the term most often refers to the forced exclusion of black people, the history of sundown towns also includes prohibitions against Jews, Native Americans, Chinese, Japanese, and other groups. In education, Orange County school boards justified segregation on the basis of the separate but equal doctrine. According to an article in the March 5, 1945 Orange Daily News, education policymakers, including Garden Grove Superintendent James Kent, thought that Mexican children were intellectually, culturally, and morally inferior to whites. Kent argued that it would disadvantage Mexican students to send them to integrated schools because, quote, they would feel inferior because of their clothing and economic status, unquote. In early 1945, the Mendez, Ramirez, Palomino, Estrada, and Guzman families filed a lawsuit in federal court in Los Angeles against 4 Orange County school districts, Westminster, Santa Ana, Garden Grove, and El Medina, seeking an injunction that would order their schools' integration. The school districts organized to resist. Senior District Judge Paul J. McCormick, sitting in Los Angeles, presided at the trial and ruled in favor of Mendez and his co-plaintiffs on February 18, 1946, finding segregated schools to be an unconstitutional denial of equal protection. The school district appealed to the Ninth Federal District Court of Appeals in San Francisco, which upheld George McCormick's decision, finding that the segregation practices violated the 14th Amendment. Governor Earl Warren, who would later become Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court and preside over Brown v. Board of Education, signed into law the repeal of the remaining segregationist provisions in the California statutes. Several organizations joined the appellate case, including the NAACP, represented by Thurgood Marshall and Robert L. Carter, who would go on to argue the case in Brown v. Board of Education. The Mendez case led the way for Brown v. Board of Education, in which the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously ruled segregation in public schools unconstitutional.
Until the 1940s, the county's economy was based largely on agriculture. But between 1941 and 1943, 5 military bases were established in Orange County in Costa Mesa, Tustin, Santa Ana, Los Alamitos, and El Toro. After the war, many of the servicemen who had been stationed in Orange County stayed and brought their families here. Aerospace industries, including Northrop, Douglas, and Hughes, relocated here to take advantage of the technically skilled veterans who stayed on after the war. In the 1950s, Orange County became a rapidly growing suburban community, characterized as predominantly white and predominantly conservative. In 1950, 200,000 people lived in Orange County. Within 10 years, the population had more than tripled to 764,000. New housing tracts spread out across vacant lots, roads and freeways were rapidly constructed and expanded, and orange groves were replaced by manufacturing and industrial plants. During this era, all across the nation, white Americans were fleeing the cities to new housing developments in the suburbs, commonly referred to in history as white flight. Many of these newly developed subdivisions were funded by loans by the Federal Housing Authority. Between 1934 and 1962, the federal government backed $120 billion worth of home loans. More than 98% were granted to white Americans.
Deed restrictions denied purchase or renting of housing to those of, quote, African or Asiatic descent, or to any person not of the white or Caucasian race, unquote. The only exception was, quote, domestic servants, chauffeurs, or gardeners of other than white or Caucasian race may live in or occupy the premises where their employers reside, unquote. Some of these restrictions remained in place in the 1950s when people like Natalie Kennedy went door to door in her Fullerton neighborhood with petitions to allow the first Chinese American family in Fullerton, the Chins, to move in. In 1963, the California legislature passed the Rumford Fair Housing Act, which declared that racial discrimination in housing, rental, or sales was against the law. In response, the California Association of Realtors sponsored Proposition 14 to overthrow the Rumford Fair Housing Act. Prop 14 effectively allowed landlords to refuse to rent to African Americans, Asians, Latinos, and any other group of persons against whom they were prejudiced. Orange County voters overwhelmingly supported Prop 14 with 75% of the vote, and it passed statewide.
The same year that voters in California had approved Prop 14, Dorothy Mulkey and her then husband Lincoln, both Navy veterans, were turned away when they tried to rent a vacant Santa Ana apartment in 1963. Mulkey challenged Prop 14, and the ACLU and Fair Housing Council took her case all the way to the Supreme Court. In 1967, the court declared Prop 14 unconstitutional. Landlords no longer could refuse to rent to people because of their skin color, religion, or ethnicity. The fair housing movement was a very active aspect of Orange County's civil rights era. The Fullerton and Orange County Fair Housing Councils were both formed in the mid-60s. Following the killing of Captain John Birch by Chinese communists on August 25th of 1945, Robert Welch started the John Birch Society in December of 1958 to fight against communism in America. In its early days, the group focused on its efforts in opposing issues such as those being addressed in the nation's civil rights movement. Welch argued that the average African American, quote, has complete freedom of religion, freedom of movement, and freedom to run his own life as he pleases, so no movement was needed. In the early 1960s, Orange County residents joined the John Birch Society in droves. According to author Lisa McGurr, the strength of the movement gained Orange County the reputation as the national home of the John Birch Society. The actual headquarters were in Massachusetts. Orange County, in effect, gave birth in the early 1960s to a movement that would help shape the national political landscape and inform conservatism in the following years.
Also in the 1960s, Orange County became home to a number of anti-communist politicians and activists who opposed civil rights, including John George Schmitz, who served in both the California Senate and the U.S. Congress in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. He was known for his somewhat outrageous statements, including, quote, Martin Luther King is a notorious liar, unquote, and claiming the Watts riots to be, quote, a communist operation. And Fred Schwartz, who organized the School of Anti-Communism in Orange County. According to Lisa McGurr's book, Suburban Warriors, Schwartz attracted 12,000 people to his one-day school, including students who had been permitted to attend by their high schools. Reputable organizations such as the Kiwanis helped promote the event. It was held at the Disneyland Hotel and the Anaheim High School auditorium. In addition, Congressman James Utt, who blatantly stated, quote, large contingent of barefooted Africans, unquote, might be training Georgia for what he hinted could be part of a United Nations military exercise to take over the United States. Utt was elected 4 times to his central Orange County congressional seat. In 1971, in response to the civil rights era and civil unrest in Watts, Los Angeles, the Orange County Board of Supervisors established the Orange County Human Relations Commission as a pilot project to build mutual understanding among residents and to eliminate prejudice, intolerance, and discrimination. In 1991, the nonprofit OC Human Relations Council was founded to respond to the growing need for services and programs aimed at creating an Orange County where all people can live free of violence and discrimination.
125,000 people came to the U.S. at the end of the Vietnam War. However, 2/3 of Americans disapproved of the opening of borders to Vietnamese immigrants and refugees. Another wave, the so-called boat people, arrived between 1977 and 1990. Approximately 600,000 Vietnamese refugees were admitted to the U.S. during these years. We are now the home to over 60 different Asian ethnic groups who speak over 80 different languages. Orange County's Little Saigon is the world's largest community of Vietnamese living outside of Vietnam. The area includes parts of Garden Grove, Westminster, and Santa Ana. Of the cities with the largest Vietnamese populations in the United States, 4 are in Orange County.
The Los Angeles Times reported that on July 30th, 1978, Anaheim police were called to Little People's Park in the Penguin City barrio in response to a drive-by shooting. While the shooters were long gone, youth in the park became the focus of police attention and violence broke out. Anaheim barrio residents claimed police had harassed young Latinos and used unnecessary force in the Little People's Park. Some community members went as far as calling it a police riot. The police stated that they had responded to a report of gunshots near the park and had been met by an unruly crowd who pelted them with rocks and bottles as they attempted to carry out their duties. Allegations of police brutality and harassment were leveled, and an ACLU civil rights lawsuit was filed. As a result of the investigation, the following changes in procedure were made by the Anaheim PD. Officers were required to carry business cards. The police complaint procedure was revised. Officers were required to attend cultural awareness training sessions. The Anaheim Police Community Relations Board was created, and patrol cars were designated with 4-inch unit numeric decals, and officers were required to wear large embroidered name patches on their jackets.
Also in 1978, Orange County State Senator John Briggs proposed Proposition 6, or the Briggs Initiative, in order to give California school boards the authority to, quote, ban those teachers who were gay or promoted homosexuality. Traditional family values groups organized behind Briggs. Hymn-singing rallies were held, and evangelists such as Jerry Falwell visited California to offer their support. Ultimately, however, the proposition went down in defeat due to the efforts of broad-based campaigns composed of teachers, civil rights activists, and organizations such as OC Human Relations. In the early 1980s, a large wave of Cambodian, Hmong, and Laotian refugees who had escaped the killing fields of the communist Khmer Rouge regime began coming to the United States. Many came to Orange County and settled in the mini-street neighborhood of Santa Ana, where crowded apartment complexes offered some of the lowest rents in the county.
In 1985, Alex O'Day, the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee's Southern California regional director, was killed when a powerful pipe bomb exploded as he unlocked and opened the door of the Anti-Discrimination Committee's office. The night before he was killed, he defended PLO leader Yasser Arafat on local TV. Immediately after the 1985 assassination, the FBI identified 3 suspects who had fled to Israel. All were believed to be affiliated with the Jewish Defense League. No charges have ever been laid. The FBI has offered a $1 million reward for information leading to the arrest or conviction of the perpetrators. In 1997, the Alex O'Day Memorial statue in front of the Santa Ana Central Library was vandalized with red paint. Despite, or perhaps because of the vocal OC minority opposed to gay rights, Orange County students have been very active in forming gay support clubs at their schools. One of the first was at Fountain Valley High School in 1993. In 1999, spurred by the murder of Matthew Shepard and frequent taunting and bullying, Anthony Colleen, an openly gay 15-year-old student from El Modena High School, attempted to form a gay-straight alliance club on campus, so he and anyone else on campus would have a place, even for a little while, that was free from hostility. After deferring action on their application for several months, while denying students permission to meet, the Orange Unified School District Board formally denied an application by the Gay Straight Alliance to become a recognized student club and to meet at El Modena High School. The board insisted it would only reconsider the club's application if the group changed its name and agreed to limitations on speech not required of other clubs. Anthony Colleen and the GSA sued in federal court. In 2000, after a preliminary injunction was granted, allowing the club to meet pending trial, a favorable settlement was reached. The GSA was allowed to keep its name and was given the same access to school facilities as all other student clubs. According to Lambda Legal, who represented Colleen and the GSA in the fight, quote, "This landmark case marks the first time a school was ordered to allow a GSA to meet on campus. Since then, it's been invoked countless times around the country when students' rights to form a GSA have been questioned." Unquote. While there has been the occasional negative response from school boards, and it can still be a struggle to organize groups, there are now GSAs all across Orange County high schools.
In 1994, Prop 187, also called the Save Our State campaign, was co-authored by Orange County Congressman Dana Rohrabacher and the Huntington Beach-based California Coalition for Immigration Reform. Prop 187 called for government services, including public education, to be denied to undocumented immigrants and their children. It won by a 2-to-1 margin in Orange County, but court rulings prohibited its implementation. In 2004, Orange County resident James Gilchrist formed the Minutemen to enforce immigration laws and to stop the, quote, mobs of illegal aliens who endlessly stream across U.S. borders, end quote. While it claims to accept no support and to not be affiliated with racist or white power groups, there are concerns about the vigilante approach of this organization. The Minutemen generated national attention and received considerable support in Orange County in the mid-2000s. Gilchrist even ran for Congress and garnered 25% of the vote. In 1996, California voters approved Prop 209, also known as the California Civil Rights Initiative or Affirmative Action Initiative. This amended the state constitution to prohibit state government institutions from considering race, sex, or ethnicity specifically in the areas of public employment, public contracting, and public education. Darrell Issa, congressman from South Orange County, served as a co-chairperson of the campaign in favor. In 1998, California adopted Prop 227, the English in Public Schools Initiative, essentially ending a 30-year program of bilingual education in California and replaced it with a controversial English immersion program that was meant to transition children from their primary language to English over the course of a single school year. The prop was co-authored by Santa Ana teacher Gloria Mata Tuckman. The measure passed with 61% of the voters supporting it. In 2016, Prop 58, or the California Non-English Languages Allowed in Public Education Act, repealed Prop 227 almost 20 years after, with almost 75% of the vote.
Huntington Beach was a favorite hangout for white power and racist skinhead youth. In 1994, after a white supremacist murdered Vernon Flournoy, an African-American man, in front of the McDonald's on Beach Boulevard, the City Council of Huntington Beach, its residents, police department, and OC Human Relations Commission came together in a campaign to make their city an unfriendly place for racists. A Human Relations Task Force was created in 1996 to help address intolerance. Anaheim club The Shack frequently held white power concerts in the early 2000s until protests deterred the owners from continuing to allow them. The Shack was later closed. Hate crime perpetrators such as Michael Page, the 2012 Wisconsin Sikh temple shooter, was connected to Orange. Samuel Woodward, who murdered Blaise Bernstein in 2018 in Mission Viejo, was suspected of being part of the Atomwaffen group, who essentially are considered an extreme far-right militant neo-Nazi group in America. Across the nation and locally, we are seeing the ever-increasing drive and push for cities and communities to respond to hate with task force commissions and other groups to ensure their communities are working toward inclusivity and safety.
White nationalists and other hate groups are monitored and tracked annually by the Southern Poverty Law Center. In 2019, SPLC reported that 940 hate groups were in the United States, 88 in California, the highest number state in the nation, and 8 in Orange County. These 8 hate groups across 7 different Orange County cities include Act for America, Laguna Woods and Mission Viejo, Institute for Historical Review in Newport Beach, Occidental Observer in Laguna Hills, Pacific Justice Institute in Santa Ana, Proud Boys in Anaheim, Right Brand Clothing in Anaheim, and Rise Above Movement in Huntington Beach. OC Human Relations also tracks hate crimes and hate incidents annually, and unfortunately, there has been an upward trend since the 2016 election. Orange County schools continue to be a reminder of the work to be done and the success that can come from community effort. They have been the location of hate crimes and hate incidents, but our local schools have also been the space for community, action, and change. When the Westboro Baptist Church, an anti-LGBTQ hate group, targeted Anaheim High School in 2015, Anaheim confronted their hate with love. Pictured on the bottom left are members of OC Human Relations staff and board, with students and community members spreading messages of love, community, and acceptance. In 2017, as a civics project, students at Savannah High School initiated a name change to their mascot that paid homage to the Southern Confederacy Johnny Rebel. The school community took a reflective look at their rebel mascot and conducted a school-wide discussion about whether it was an appropriate representation of their community. The school community voted to rebrand their mascot, which the district approved. The killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, to name only a few, and the subsequent uprisings and protests this summer have motivated an international reckoning on the topic of racial justice. Here in Orange County, we are seeing the deep need and desire to recognize, address, heal, and grow from our own history and its impact locally and nationally. From name changes of places named after racist figures such as Plummer Auditorium in Fullerton, Fanning Elementary in Brea, or to even those that propose changing the name of John Wayne Airport, there is a push for changes in systems and age-old practices and beliefs. The good news is there are many human and civil rights organizations and concerned individuals who are working hard to make Orange County a safe and welcoming place for everyone. The next chapter of our civil rights history depends on the work of all of us. We invite you to join us in creating a future where all people can live free from discrimination and violence, where all feel respected and included. Thank you for listening.